The year was 2347, and humanity had spread across 12 star systems. They had built cities on distant worlds and stations that floated among the stars. Earth remained their home, the blue and green jewel that gave birth to their species. Commander Jack stood on the bridge of the UTS Defiant and watched the planet spin slowly below him. He had served in the fleet for 20 years and had never seen a real war. That was about to change. The alarm started screaming at 3 in the morning. Jack ran to the command center and saw something that made his blood turn cold. Thousands of ships were emerging from hyperspace around Earth. They were massive vessels covered in black armor and strange symbols. The Dominion had arrived. Jack had heard stories about every spacefaring species knew about them. They were an ancient empire of creatures who had conquered over 200 civilizations across the galaxy. Their philosophy was simple and terrifying. They destroyed any species that might one day become a threat to them. They did not negotiate. They did not show mercy. They simply erased entire worlds from existence. The battle lasted 72 hours. The human defense fleet fought with everything they had. Jack watched his friends die on screens all around him. He saw orbital stations explode into clouds of fire and metal. He saw missiles rain down on the cities below. New York burned. Tokyo burned. London and Paris and Cairo and Sydney all burned. Billions of people died in those 3 days. The screams on the radio channels were something Jack would never forget. Dr. Lisa Grant was on Mars when Earth fell. She was a who had spent her life studying alien life forms. She stood in her laboratory and watched the news feeds with tears streaming down her face. The final transmission from Earth Command was only 6 words: "All is lost. Survive. Remember us." Then there was only static. The Supreme Commander was a towering creature named. He stood 8 feet tall with 4 arms and eyes that glowed like dying stars. He broadcast a message to every remaining human colony. His voice was cold and mechanical. He told humanity that they had 7 days to surrender completely. Every weapon must be destroyed. Every ship must be handed over. Every human must kneel before the Dominion. If they refused, they would hunt them down and kill every last one of them. The galaxy watched and waited. Other alien species who had suffered under rule expected the humans to kneel. Every species before them had done exactly that. They had surrendered. They had surrendered. They had surrendered. Resistance was pointless against such overwhelming power. Everyone knew this. Jack retreated with what was left of the fleet, 17 ships out of the hundreds that had defended Earth. They hid in the asteroid belt in a base that had been built for emergencies. The survivors gathered in a cold metal room and looked at each other with hollow eyes. They had lost everything: their homes, their families, their world. Lieutenant Kate Murphy sat in the corner and stared at the wall. She was 28 years old and had been a tactical officer for 5 years. Her parents had lived in Chicago. Her brother had lived in Seattle. Her grandmother had lived in a small town in Ireland. They were all gone now. Every person she had ever loved was dead. The military leaders and colonial governors held a vote. The choice was simple: surrender and live as slaves, or fight and probably die. The arguments went back and forth for hours. Some said that survival was the only thing that mattered. Others said that survival without freedom was not really living at all. Kate Murphy stood up. The room fell silent. She was not a general or a governor. She was just a lieutenant who had lost everything. But something in her eyes made everyone pay attention. She spoke in a voice that was steady and calm. "They think they have broken us. They think this is the end of our story. They have burned our world and killed our people, and they expect us to kneel. But they have forgotten something important. They have forgotten what humans really are." She looked around the room at the tired and broken faces. "We are the species that survived ice ages when we had nothing but stone tools and fire. We are the species that crossed oceans in wooden ships because we wanted to see what was on the other side. We are the species that cured diseases that killed millions. We are the species that looked at the moon and said we will walk there someday, and then we did. We do not give up. We do not surrender. We do not kneel." Kate walked to the center of the room. They have conquered 200 civilizations. They have never faced a species like us. They think this war is over. Let us show them that it has just begun. The vote was held. Every single person raised their hand for war. Not one chose surrender. Jack looked at Kate Murphy with something like hope in his eyes. It was the first time he had felt anything but despair since the attack began. He stood up and addressed the survivors. We are few and they are many. We have almost nothing and they have everything. The odds are against us and the galaxy expects us to fail. But we will not fail. We will fight with everything we have. We will make them pay for every life they took. And someday, somehow, we will make them understand that they should never have come to our world. The message went out to every hidden human colony and every scattered refugee ship. Earth had fallen, but humanity had not. The resistance was born in that cold metal room in the asteroid belt. It was born from grief and anger and a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Received reports that the humans had rejected his offer. His advisors expected him to be angry. Instead, he made a sound that might have been laughter. He told them it did not matter. The humans would be destroyed like all the others. They were just too foolish to know it yet. He was wrong. They had conquered species that were older and stronger and more advanced than humanity. But they had never fought a species that simply refused to die. They thought the fall of Earth was the end of the story. They forgot what humans really are. The war was just beginning. 6 months had passed since the fall of Earth. The human survivors had become ghosts. They hid in asteroid fields and abandoned moons and the dark, empty spaces between stars where the scanners could not reach them. They moved constantly and never stayed in one place for long. They learned to live in the shadows. Jack had changed. The man who had once commanded a fleet from a gleaming bridge now wore patched clothes and slept in cargo holds. He had grown a beard and there were new lines on his face. But his eyes were still sharp and his mind was still working. He had transformed from a fleet commander into something they had never seen before, a guerrilla leader. His ragtag fleet of 17 ships became a nightmare for the enemy. They would appear from nowhere and strike a supply convoy. They would destroy the cargo ships and vanish before reinforcements could arrive. They would leave no trace except burning wreckage and dead soldiers. They began to call Jack by a new name, the Shadow. On the frozen moon of Titan Station, an engineer named Ben Carter worked in a hidden laboratory. Before the war, he had designed civilian cargo ships. He had never built a weapon in his life. Now he built nothing else. His hands were covered in burns and his eyes were red from lack of sleep. He worked 18 hours a day because every day he wasted was a day that got stronger. Ben had developed something special, a new type of missile that could penetrate shields by mimicking the energy signature of their own vessels. The enemy shields would think the missile was friendly and let it pass right through. It was brilliant and it was deadly. Ben called it the Ghost Arrow. Lisa Grant was not free. They had captured her during a raid on a refugee convoy. They took her to a research facility on one of their conquered worlds. The aliens were fascinated by humans. They had destroyed so many species, but none had fought like this one. They wanted to understand why. They studied Lisa for weeks. They probed her mind with machines and asked her endless questions. They wanted to know why humans kept fighting when victory was impossible. They wanted to know the source of human hope. Lisa sat in her cell and smiled at her captors. She told them they would learn soon enough. The scientists did not understand what she meant. They would. Kate Murphy had become a legend. She led a team of soldiers on missions that everyone said were impossible. Her latest assignment was a ground operation on a planet called 442b. They had occupied a human colony there, and Kate's mission was to rescue survivors and gather intelligence about enemy defenses. What she found changed everything. The ground forces were not invincible. Their soldiers were strong and well-armed, but they had weaknesses. They relied too much on their technology and their shields. In close combat, without their machines to protect them, they could be killed. Human soldiers were smaller and weaker, but they were faster and more adaptable. They could fight in conditions that would kill most species. They could keep going long after their bodies should have stopped. Kate and her team rescued 47 colonists and killed over 200 soldiers. She brought back detailed information about enemy tactics and equipment. More importantly, she brought back hope. They could be beaten. Not easily and not without cost, but they could be beaten. Other species began to notice what the humans were doing. They were a peaceful race who had surrendered to the centuries ago. They had lived as slaves ever since, too afraid to resist. But now they watched the humans fight and something stirred inside them, something that had been dead for a very long time. A elder named made secret contact with the human resistance. He was old and frail, and he had seen his people broken by but he still remembered what freedom felt like. He offered to share information about the enemy in exchange for a promise. If the humans somehow won this war, they would free the two. Met with Jack on a hidden station in deep space. The two sat across from each other in a small dark room, looked at the human with his large silver eyes and felt something he had not felt in centuries. He felt hope. Delivered bad news along with his offer of help. They were growing impatient with the human resistance. Supreme Commander had ordered a final extermination campaign. Every remaining human colony would be destroyed within the year. The aliens were done playing games. Jack listened to this news without expression. His face was like stone, but his mind was racing. Time was running out. They needed to do something big, something that would change the entire war. He asked a single question, "Where is the?" Stared at him. No conquered species had ever asked that question. No one had ever been crazy enough to think about attacking the at home. There was the most heavily defended place in the galaxy. Thousands of ships protected it. Millions of soldiers guarded it. Going there was suicide. Jack repeated his question, gave him the coordinates. Back on the hidden base, Jack gathered his officers and shared what he had learned. They were coming to finish them off. They had maybe 12 months before the extermination fleet reached them. They could run and hide and maybe survive a little longer, or they could do something insane. Kate Murphy was the first to speak. She said they should attack. If they were going to die anyway, they should die fighting. They should hit the enemy where it hurt most. Ben Carter agreed. He said he could modify his ghost arrow technology to work on a larger scale. He could give them weapons that could hurt them badly. Very badly. Lisa Grant was still in captivity, but they all knew she would say the same thing. Fight, always fight, never surrender. Jack looked around at his officers. They were tired and scared and outnumbered. They had lost almost everything. But in their eyes he saw something that they would never understand. He saw defiance. He saw courage. He saw the stubborn human refusal to accept defeat. He made his decision. They would not wait for the enemy to come to them. They would take the war to the itself. It was crazy. It was probably impossible. It was exactly what humans did best. The planning began that night. The darkness came for humanity. The extermination fleet moved from system to system and left nothing but death behind them. They burned human colonies to ashes and salted the ground so nothing would ever grow again. They killed everyone they found and showed no mercy to anyone. Millions more humans died in those terrible months. The number of survivors dropped below 500 million scattered across the galaxy. Jack lost the UTS Defiant in a battle that should never have been fought. 3 refugee ships were fleeing from a patrol, and Jack ordered his fleet to cover their escape. The enemy had twice as many ships and better weapons. The battle lasted 4 hours. The refugees escaped, but the Defiant was torn apart by enemy fire. Jack was thrown across the bridge when the hull breached. Fire burned half his body before the emergency systems sealed the compartment. Kate Murphy pulled him from the wreckage with her own hands. She carried him to an escape pod while the ship died around them. The doctors on the hidden base worked for 12 hours to save his life. When Jack finally woke up, they gave him the bad news. The burns had destroyed too much tissue. He would never walk again. Jack did not accept this. He refused to accept anything that sounded like defeat. He asked Ben Carter to build him new legs. Ben worked for 3 weeks straight. He did not sleep more than a few hours each night. He used parts from old machines and broken ships and his own genius. When he was finished, Jack had mechanical legs that were stronger than his original ones. 3 weeks after the doctors said he would never walk again, Jack walked into the command center. His officers stared at him in shock. His legs made soft clicking sounds as he moved. His face was, and his body was held together by metal and willpower. He looked at his people and said they would have to kill him more than once if they wanted to stop him. Lisa Grant escaped from the research facility with help from an unlikely friend. A scientist named Sierra had worked at the facility for decades. She had watched the torture prisoners and destroy civilizations. She had stayed silent because she was afraid, but something about Lisa changed her. The human woman never broke. She never lost hope. She made Sierra remember what courage looked like. Sierra smuggled Lisa out through a maintenance tunnel. They stole a small ship and fled into deep space. They hunted them for weeks but could not find them. Lisa eventually reached the human resistance with something precious: knowledge. During her captivity, Lisa had learned a secret. They communicated through a hive mind network that connected all their ships and soldiers. This network depended on relay nodes spread across their territory. There were 12 of them, each one a massive station that processed billions of signals every second. If all 12 nodes were destroyed at the same time, the entire network would collapse. They would lose their ability to coordinate. Their fleet would become a confused mess of individual ships unable to work together. Kate Murphy became the leader of a new unit. She called them the Night Hunters. They were volunteers who underwent the hardest training any human had ever experienced. They learned to fight in zero gravity and in crushing pressure. They learned to survive on almost no food and water. They learned to kill quickly and silently. They painted their armor black and carried no identification. If they were captured, they would die before revealing any information. The Night Hunters became ghosts that haunted patrols. They would board enemy ships in the night and kill everyone aboard. They would sabotage weapons factories and disappear before anyone knew they were there. They put enormous bounties on their heads. Kate collected the wanted posters and hung them on her wall like trophies. On a colony world called New Helsinki, a farmer named Danny refused to evacuate when they came. He had lived on that planet his whole life. His parents were buried there. His children had been born there. He would not abandon it. Danny organized the other colonists. They were farmers and miners and teachers, not soldiers, but they knew the land and they knew how to work together. When they arrived to purge the colony, they expected easy victims. They found traps hidden in the fields. They found ambushes waiting in the forests. They found humans who would rather die fighting than kneel. The Battle of New Helsinki lasted 3 weeks. The colonists were outnumbered 50-1. They had farming tools and hunting rifles against advanced alien weapons. They should have been wiped out in a single day. Instead, they held out for 21 days. They killed over 2,000 soldiers before they finally fell. Danny died leading a charge against an enemy position. His last words were a message to his children who had escaped on a refugee ship: "Never forget what we are." Supreme Commander received reports about New Helsinki and did not understand them. How could farmers kill his soldiers? How could primitives with simple weapons resist a force that had conquered the galaxy? He demanded answers from his advisors. They had none. Had crushed 200 civilizations. He had seen species older than Earth surrender without a fight. He had watched empires crumble at the mere sight of his fleet. But these humans were different. They did not surrender. They did not give up. They kept fighting even when fighting made no sense. It was illogical. It was irrational. It was starting to worry him. In a dying nebula far from any star, Jack assembled the leaders of every remaining human faction. They came from hidden bases and refugee fleets and occupied worlds. They risked everything to be there. Jack presented his plan and watched their faces as they listened. The plan was called Operation Phoenix. It was simple and insane. They would gather every ship they had. They would build new weapons using Lisa's knowledge and Ben's technology. They would strike all 12 relay nodes at once, and while the network was down, they would attack the enemy itself. Some called it madness. Some said it would never work. Some said they would all die. Kate Murphy stood up and said that maybe they would, but she would rather die trying to win than live another day hiding in the darkness. The vote was unanimous. Operation Phoenix would proceed. The humans would stop running. They would stop hiding. They would take the war to the enemy. Victory or death. There was no other option. The preparation for Operation Phoenix took 18 months. Every human who survived the war contributed something. Engineers worked double shifts in hidden shipyards building new vessels from salvaged parts. Scientists developed weapons that could hurt in ways they had never been hurt before. Soldiers trained until their bodies gave out and then trained some more. There was no time for rest. There was no room for doubt. Everything depended on this one mission. Ben Carter worked on his masterpiece in a cramped laboratory aboard a converted cargo ship. He had studied the interdiction fields that prevented enemy ships from jumping into their space. These fields were supposed to be unbreakable. Ben found a way to break them. He called his invention the Phoenix Drive. The Phoenix Drive was a modified engine that could punch through interdiction fields by creating a harmonic resonance that disrupted their energy patterns. It was brilliant and it was dangerous. Ben ran the calculations over and over. The technology was unstable. There was a 30% chance it would kill everyone aboard when it activated. He told the volunteers this. Not a single one. Kate Murphy did not stop moving during those 18 months. She led her night hunters on raid after raid across territory. They gathered intelligence about enemy fleet positions. They stole supplies and weapons and fuel. They freed prisoners from labor camps. Every mission was dangerous, and many of her people died. Kate wrote letters to their families when she could. She promised that their sacrifice would mean something. They put an enormous bounty on Kate's head. They said they would give a planet to whoever captured her. Kate laughed when she heard this. She recorded a message and broadcast it on enemy frequencies. She said she was flattered by the offer, but she would have to decline. She had a previous engagement at the Lisa Grant worked with the scientist Sierra to map the enemy communication network in detail. They identified exactly where the 12 relay nodes were located. They analyzed their defenses and found the weak points. Each node would require a small team to infiltrate and plant explosives. These teams would almost certainly not survive. Destroying the nodes meant dying with them. When Lisa asked for volunteers, the line stretched around the entire station. Humans stepped forward knowing they would never come back. They wrote final letters to loved ones and recorded goodbye messages. They did not hesitate. They did not complain. They simply prepared to give their lives so that others might win. Jack reached out to other species who had suffered under rule. They were first. Old came to the hidden base with a delegation of his people. They brought ships that were old and outdated but still capable of fighting. They brought engineers who could repair anything. Most importantly, they brought hope that the universe might finally change. They came next. They were a warrior race who had been conquered 3 centuries ago. They had never forgotten the humiliation. They had never stopped hating their masters. When they heard that the humans planned to attack they did not hesitate. They sent their best fighters and their strongest ships. Their war leader, a female named, clasped hands with Jack and swore that they would fight to the last warrior. They joined after that. They were small creatures, barely 3 feet tall, but they were the greatest engineers in the known galaxy. They had enslaved them and forced them to build weapons for the Dominion. Now they would use their skills to tear it down. They arrived with tools and materials and knowledge that made even Ben Carter stare in wonder. One by one, the oppressed peoples of the galaxy to humanity's cause. They were all different shapes and sizes. They spoke different languages and had different cultures, but they shared one thing in common. They had all lived under rule. They had all lost people they loved. They had all been waiting for someone brave enough to fight back. Supreme Commander learned about the alliance too late. His spies reported that human activity had increased across all sectors. Ships were moving, resources were being gathered, something big was happening, ordered his fleets to defensive positions around the. He doubled the guard on every important facility. He prepared for an attack, but he did not truly believe it would come. No one had ever attacked the at home. The idea was absurd. The night before the attack, Jack stood before the combined fleet of humans and aliens. 300 ships hung in the darkness of space, waiting for his command. Some were human vessels built from salvaged wreckage. Some were ancient cruisers that had seen better days. Some were warships bristling with weapons. Some were support vessels packed with repair equipment. Jack did not make grand speeches about certain victory. He told the truth. Many of them would die tomorrow, perhaps most, perhaps all. They were powerful and they were defending their home. The odds were not good. But he told them something else too. He told them that their fight mattered. Even if they lost, they would show the galaxy that tyranny could be challenged. They would prove that hope was not foolish. They would give courage to every species that had ever dreamed of freedom. He ended his speech with 4 words that were painted on the hull of every human ship in the fleet. Remember Earth. Remember us. Kate Murphy stood beside Jack and watched the fleet prepare for battle. She thought about her family who had died when Earth burned. She thought about all the friends she had lost in the years since. She thought about the colonists of New Helsinki who had fought to the last. She whispered a promise to all of them. This is for you. Lisa Grant commanded one of the strike teams that would hit the relay nodes. She had volunteered for the mission knowing she probably would not survive. Sierra was with her. The scientist had chosen to stand with the human who had shown her what courage meant. Ben Carter ran final checks on the Phoenix Drive. His hands were steady even though his heart was pounding. He had done everything he could. The rest was up to fate. The fleet jumped to hyperspace. The Battle of Prime was about to begin. The Battle of Prime began at dawn. 300 ships emerged from hyperspace inside the enemy defensive perimeter. The Phoenix Drive worked exactly as Ben Carter had designed it. They appeared where no enemy should have been able to appear. They were caught completely off guard. For the first few minutes, the enemy did not even understand what was happening. Their sensors showed Allied ships in the heart of their territory. It should have been impossible. Their commanders hesitated, waiting for orders from the Central Command. Those orders never came. The 12 strike teams hit the relay nodes at exactly the same moment. Lisa Grant led one team herself. They cut through the outer defenses and fought their way deep into the station. Soldiers tried to stop them, but the humans moved faster and hit harder. Lisa planted the explosives with steady hands while her team held off wave after wave of enemies. She activated her communicator and spoke to all the other teams. Her voice was calm and clear. For Earth, for everyone you murdered, for the future. All 12 nodes exploded at once. The flash of light could be seen across the system. The communication network collapsed in an instant. Their ships, unable to coordinate with each other, fell into chaos. Captains could not reach their commanders. Squadrons could not talk to each other. The greatest military force in the galaxy became a confused mass of individual vessels with no direction. The Allied fleet tore through their lines. Human ships fired volleys of ghost arrow missiles that slipped through enemy shields like phantoms. Warships crashed into formations and fought with savage fury. Vessels provided covering fire while engineers worked frantically to keep everything running. Kate Murphy led her night hunters in a direct assault on the Supreme Commander's flagship. They docked with the massive vessel while it was still reeling from the network collapse. The fighting inside was brutal and close. They moved corridor by corridor and room by room. Every step cost lives. Kate lost half her team before they reached the command chamber. She kicked down the door and found waiting for her. The Supreme Commander towered over her, 8 feet of armored muscle and murderous rage. His 4 arms held weapons that had killed thousands. His eyes burned with hatred for this tiny creature who dared challenge him. He told her she was insignificant. He told her that humans were insects who would be crushed beneath his heel. He told her that even if she won this battle, her species would be hunted to extinction. Kate said nothing. She simply attacked. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes, was stronger and his weapons were more powerful, but Kate was faster and she had spent years training for this moment. She dodged his strikes and found the gaps in his armor. She made him bleed. She made him hurt. She made him feel fear for the first time in his long life. She killed him with a knife through his throat. Jack commanded the battle from the bridge of the UTS Rebirth. The ship had been built from the salvaged remains of a dozen destroyed vessels. It was ugly and patched together, but it flew true, and its weapons hit hard. Jack watched the enemy formation crumble on his screens and allowed himself a moment of hope. When Kate broadcast that was dead, Jack ordered the final push. The Allied fleet surged forward. The defenders, leaderless and confused, broke and ran. Some tried to surrender. Others fought to the end. It did not matter. Nothing could stop the tide now. The fell. Their empire, built over 10,000 years of conquest and cruelty, crumbled in a single day. But the victory came at a terrible cost. 200 ships were destroyed. Millions of Allied soldiers died in the fighting. Ben Carter died defending an engine room when a boarding party broke through. He kept the engines running long enough for his ship to finish its mission. Danny had died months earlier at New Helsinki, but his children were aboard the fleet when victory was declared. They cried tears of grief and pride. Many of the strike teams did not survive. Lisa Grant was one of the lucky ones. She escaped the exploding relay node with seconds to spare. Sierra was with her. They held hands as they watched the network die. In the aftermath, as fires burned across the enemy capital, Jack walked on alien soil for the first time. His mechanical legs clicked softly on the ground. Kate walked beside him. Lisa joined them a few hours later. They stood together in the ruins of an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 10,000 years. The elder approached them. His silver eyes were filled with tears. He had waited centuries for this day. He asked Jack how the humans had done it, how they had refused to break when every other species surrendered. Jack looked at the sky where human ships patrolled as liberators instead of refugees. He thought about everyone who had been lost, everyone who had fought, everyone who had believed when belief seemed foolish. He answered in a quiet voice, "You thought it was over. You forgot what we really are. We are the species that crawled out of the mud and looked at the stars. We are the species that survived everything the universe threw at us. We are the species that refuses to quit no matter how bad things get. We do not surrender, we do not forget, and we never stop fighting." The thought they were ending a story. They were wrong. They were only beginning one. Humanity spread across the galaxy in the years that followed, but they did not become conquerors like they became liberators. They helped rebuild what had been destroyed. They welcomed other species as equals and partners. They remembered their dead and honored their sacrifice. Schools were built on 100 worlds where children of every species learned the lesson of the human war. Hope is the most dangerous weapon in the universe, and no one wields it better than humanity. 100 years later, an elderly Kate Murphy attended the memorial ceremony on Earth. The planet had been restored. Oceans sparkled blue under a clean sky. Forests grew where cities had once burned. A young child approached her. He was from the generation born after the war, raised in peace alongside humans and others. He asked if she really knew the heroes from the stories. Kate smiled and knelt down to meet his eyes. She told him that heroes were just ordinary people who refused to give up, that anyone could be one, that he could be one if he chose. She looked up at the stars where ships of every species traveled freely. She spoke the words that had become humanity's promise to the universe. Remember what we are. Remember what we can be.